The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us in plenty of time today. We are just waiting for a few other people to dial in just before we get the webinar going. We'll start in about a couple of minutes, just to give everyone time to log in. But thanks for being so prompt. We'll speak to you soon.
Emily, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Everyone can, Don. Okay, hello everyone, and a really warm welcome to you all. And thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, which, as you can see on your screen, is Shaping the Future of Fit North American Kids. My name is Heather Thorpe, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. I'm with juststyle.com, which, for those of you that don't know, is a global news website. We provide news, research, and analysis. Which has been around for about 19 years, and we're run for apparel sourcing people who are looking for information that will help them to connect the dots on the global apparel supply chain. So before I introduce you to today's speakers, I just have a couple of very quick housekeeping points I'd like to mention. So today's presentation will be approximately 35 minutes. We're going to leave lots of time for a live Q&A. So you'll be welcome to post any questions that you have to our speakers today. You can do that quite easily through your questions box in the Go to Webinar menu. I'm going to do my best to ask as many questions as I can during that period, but if I don't have a chance to ask your question, it will be passed straight back through to Alvanon so that they can answer you directly offline. We are making an audio-visual recording of today's webinar, and that will be provided as an on-demand replay, which will be available on Just Style, which is www.just-style.com. That will be within the next few days. Fingers crossed tomorrow, but maybe Monday at the latest. For those of you who have registered already today, you will automatically receive an email which will contain this a direct link to that replay version anyway. So please feel free to share with your colleagues. Finally, if you do experience any technical difficulties during the presentation, you're welcome to get in touch with me through the chat box or the questions box, and I'll do my absolute best to help you. So without further ado, I would very much like to introduce you to Don and Emily, who will be guiding you through today's webinar. I'll start the introductions with Emily Robertson Hood, who is a senior consultant with Alvanon. For over 20 years, Emily has led teams of engineers, QA, pattern makers, graders, and technical developers in the fit, construction, and global manufacturing of apparel products ranging from denim to down. She's also led teams at Levi Strauss & Co., Land's End, and Eddie Bauer. Emily also developed her own line of apparel, and it's sold from her retail location. So as a result, she understands the problems facing both a global business as well as the small independents. Alongside Emily today, we have Don Howard, who is the Executive Director at Alvanon. Don brings us over 35 years experience in apparel retail, design and manufacturing. He joined Alvanon back in 2010 as a consultant, and in 2013 was named as an executive director to head its global consulting team. He's established Alvanon's renowned professional development series, industry training program, and is a recognized expert in pre-production process assessment, technical design, and product development, with a particular emphasis on implementing sizing and fit standards. So you can see that we've got some great pedigrees with us today. So you're definitely in really good, safe, experienced hands. Anyway, enough from me. I'm going to pass you over to Don now, who is going to provide you with today's presentation.
Thank you very much, Heather, and thanks to all of you who have joined our webinar today. We're really kind of humbled and overwhelmed by the response we've received from this. We here at Alvanon, besides Emily and myself, are very excited to share with you today some of the work that we've been doing recently on the North American kids and talking about shaping the future of fit and sizing standards specifically. For those of you who know Alvanon, and for maybe some of you who don't, we have a history of innovation and using technology to bring technical tools and solutions to the apparel market. Over 20 years ago, Alvanon first began working with 3D avatars, a lot of experimentation on virtual fitting rooms, and we realized that 3D avatar would lead us to a tool that was sorely missing in the apparel industry, and that was that physical fit stand that's commonly used, fit mannequin, that's commonly used as an evaluation tool in manufacturing. So over the years, we've continued to innovate in technology in really all aspects of the work that we do here. And our technology really fundamentally is about the technology of the body, and that technology of the body is fully encapsulated in not only our fit standards and fit forms, but all the tools that we bring to market for commercial application. Interestingly, Alvanon was founded by Dr. Kenneth Wang, and prior to Alvanon, the Wang family had deep roots in history in the children's wear manufacturing. As a matter of fact, some of the first standards that Alvanon ever developed in physical fit forms were kids forms, and those were back in the early 2000s. And we've been hearing so much in the industry about maybe how standards might not be mapping as well as they could to the actual size and shape of kids. And we realized internally that we really needed to take a look at this again and update where we could the children's wear size and fit tools, not only in the physical, but for bringing development solutions for today in both the 3D and the physical. Just a little bit more background here. In the work we do at Alvanon with our clients, they tend to come back, and we typically advise them to revisit their sizing and fit standards every 6 to 8 years, for instance. And there's a reason for that. Number one, there could be target demographic changes that are occurring. They could be experiencing as a brand some evolving strategic objectives, and of course, new and exciting market opportunities that might present themselves. And putting that together with the past several years, hearing from our clients about the challenges that they're having in children's wear, and knowing that many of the existing standards that exist were developed a decade at least or so ago. Now, we do have clients in the US and worldwide who continue to use existing standards successfully. Some have expressed challenges over the past several years in fitting what might be referred to as the actual size, shape, and statures of the kids' demographic. And we see them doing a lot of workarounds, making adjustments, not only in an effort to meet the demands of the market, but feedback that they're getting for specific challenges that need to be addressed. And I'm sure everyone who's dialed into this webinar is acutely aware of the challenges that exist with any children's standard range, because you're dealing with an extreme evolution of the body for size, shape, and very aggressive stature changes that occur from birth to 18. One of the other big challenges in children's wear is every brand has a different target demographic they're going after. Some use product from newborn all the way to size 20. And we know that there are particular challenges in that mid kid, older, what we call maybe youth size ranges from 8 to 20, because the differences in the bodies become so much more pronounced. And specifically, I'm talking about the people out there who are creating school uniforms, anybody who is dealing in team sports for that older kid youth demographic, and of course the increasing need to address for unisex sizing. So, we did a lot of thinking about this, and we approached this challenge the way we approach all of our work. We listened to the needs of the market, who is the client for us. We gather any and all data that's available and analyze it. And data is everywhere today. We live in a world of an abundant source of data. And we know here at Alvanon that having great data is really helpful. It's wonderful. But knowing what data to look at and what to do with it to create a solution for market, I think that's really where we do excel. So we used our research and our data in conjunction with our expert 3D modeling team, and we created what we feel are some solutions here and tools to meet the challenges that address the market today. So I believe that's enough of exposition from me. Emily, please say hello, and could you kind of talk us through how we approach this specific problem?
Absolutely. So hello, everybody. The methodology we used, Don's already alluded to a little bit about that. We are incredibly lucky that we have many clients that produce children's apparel right now, and our first stop is always to go to them. So we made a concerted effort to go to some of the key children's wear brands in North America to gain feedback from them and to understand some of the challenges that they're facing. And more importantly, now in this age of feedback and input, to understand some of the input and feedback that they get from the users of the product, so the parents and kids, etc. Don also alluded to the fact that we have some amazing internal resources. We have a very significant internal proprietary scan database, as well as an app that we previously had out in the market called the Alva Kids app. So we had a database of kids measurements from that. No study of children would be complete without taking a look at developmental patterns as they go through their lives. And we did, as Don say, look at the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, World Health Org, and then much pediatric and medical research. And the really important thing here, and we can't stress enough, is that we want to always understand what to do with that data. And that's where we really feel like we've got a little bit of strength here. So we looked at the data and then made some really decent commercial and viable choices that reflected that data.
Thanks, Emily. Just a little bit of perspective on kid sizing. And again, for some of you, this is a review, but it's always important to put these challenges kind of in perspective. The real challenge is that kids really vary within a broad height and weight range. Children at any height can really be nearly any age. If you have kids or you go to the classroom and you see a group of fourth graders stand up and you look at them, and they could all be different sizes and shapes, but stature is usually what jumps out. So how do you identify what size garments to buy and what size your child will really be and ensure they'll fit into that product? So, and of course, is that product even age appropriate? Today with e-commerce shopping, how do brands create and message sizing more easily and fit today's youth more accurately? Now, sizing globally in general, there's two ways to do it. US, UK, and Australia size by age, and that's a practice that for some reason started in the 40s. European countries and Asia size by height, and we kind of have a point of view on that. We really feel strongly that sizing by height is much more accurate than age. But the challenge there is it really doesn't differentiate between your girth sizes, right? So a younger, taller child who might find the right length may get a garment that's really too big around the body. We know a lot of youth brands offer alpha sizing maybe as a solve for that to avoid that age size issue, but that can also be problematic because larger size product predicts maybe a kid who would be bigger in girth, but not necessarily a kid who would be taller or shorter. So we've got some key challenges here to look at. Age sizing versus height sizing. Again, just to reiterate here, sizing by age really assumes that a child's growth and development occur in tandem with their age and the market target segment, so who you're going after in terms of your product. Unfortunately, that method is really only most useful up to size 2, right? And also helps indicate an expectation for garment functionality. So obviously for younger kids, you're looking at more things than just size and height. And then when you get after age 3, sizing by height is definitely more accurate. It does not assume that growth is correlated to age. And again, at any given height, children really can be any age after the age of 3. So Emily, can you talk us through some of the key findings that we found as we were going through this exercise?
Yes. So one thing that we noticed was a lot of the brands are aligned with each other. So that should be reassuring for some brands to know that you're not anywhere that far outside of what other people are doing. But when we took a look at the data, we found that a lot of the assumptions were either smaller or shorter than what the current health and body girth data indicates. So it's so interesting. Whenever you data gather, what always happens is usually themes emerge and then they repeat themselves. And when we hear that repeat over and over again is when we know that we're on to something. And one of the things that we heard repeatedly that was that the current standards were for a child whose posture is too straight. So they were standing in too upright of a position, and anyone that's has access to a child knows what's happened to posture, what with screen time and time spent on the sofa. Also, proportionately, they're a little bit, the existing standards are a little bit short in the torso. Additionally, kids tend to arch their back and stick out their tummies a bit more at a certain age. So that was something that the brands saw and that we also saw reflected in the data. So the data, however, did really corroborate much of what we saw about these posture and stature distribution findings. And what we really leapt out for us is that real body growth is not linear. So people don't grow in stair steps. The stair steps that you see are not happening. It's more like step, leap, step, leap. So there's that little there's a gap and then there's a growth spurt, which we saw abundantly represented. The other thing was that the age to size name correlation used in the United States doesn't really work, but oddly, there's very little appetite for change. And I think that could be due largely to logistical reasons. Trying to sway a whole team or your the entire buying population over to a name change would be pretty significant. And what we really found is most brands get around this by displaying both height and weight on their size charts. So in a way, people are almost there in that they're referring to height and weight. We just need to push that a little bit further and now develop into that height and weight. So the health metrics and data research that we plumbed in order to come to the conclusions was very interesting. One of the things I love this graphic because it really shows how the human body grows at what points in your life. So a lot of, from birth up to age 1, a lot of growth in the trunk. You see very short extremities. And then as kids enter from 1 year into puberty, you begin to see their extremities grow. And then in adolescence, you see growth in the trunk area. And sadly, as some of us adults know, it sometimes continues to grow. So there is that pattern going on within the population. And what's very interesting here is when we pull out charts to take a look at We track certain things. So what you're looking at now is what's called a 50th percentile chart. And in the 50th percentile, what that refers to is if you have 100 people, there are 50 people below this range and 50 people above this range. So this is really the middle of the data set, and where does the population reside within that? So we've tracked both female and male children between 0 and 24 months, just to see what their weight and their height is, or their length rather. And this is the length thing. So you can see they're tracking pretty evenly here, and that's an interesting thing to note, with the boy being just a wee bit taller all the way along the path.
And Emily, this might be a little bit more of a U.S.-centric thing, but for those of us who bring their kid to the doctor or have brought their kid to the doctor, you're always being compared to the percentiles for height, weight, and growth. So, when you're in the doctor's office, and we do a lot of pediatric research here, this is a metric that might resonate most with the U.S., but I just felt like we needed to give a little more context on that.
Yeah, I know every parent hears that your child is in the X percentile, and what does that mean? And I think that that's how people get grounded on knowing what percentiles are.
Yep.
So some of the themes that we saw after you get out of 24 months is you begin to see that the total height or stature grow. There's growth in the head and neck length, trunk length, and leg length really increases very rapidly. It's very interesting. And this is a time in this middle childhood when girls on average are a little bit taller than boys. So we took that into consideration. Some of us have been that tall girl when we've gone to the social dance and realized, gosh, guys are shorter than us. So extremities, as we said, sometimes it looks like kids are all arms and legs. I'm sure you've had friends and family you can describe as that kid looks like he's all arms and legs. And then also you begin to lose some of that baby fat through the face, and there's significant jawbone growth. I took a look at more skeletons and skulls than I thought I would ever look at in this study.
So the term gangly youth certainly comes to play here in that spot.
Yes, it does. So regarding puberty onset, where we really saw height being affected was the onset of puberty. And typically girls are entering this between ages 8 and 12. And what's really surprising is this affects every single characteristic on their body. The boys are entering this after age 13, and their weight and their height will begin to surpass girls at that age. And that's what we really see on this next chart. It's almost like the roads absolutely diverge. So here on this chart, which is again the 50th percentile of children from 2 to 19, their height by age, again provided by the CDC. You can see, thank you, Don, scrolling in that area between ages 8 and 12, where you see the red line at certain points is a little bit taller than the blue line for the males. But then look at the divergence. That female line just absolutely leaves and grows at a slower growth rate than the males, who just absolutely leap up. So naturally, when we saw this, we thought, oh my gosh, that's pretty darn dramatic. And the changes that are going to be affected by this are going to be pretty remarkable. So we went into our proprietary database to see, gosh, let's double check this and make sure that we're seeing the same thing. And the data that we could reliably count on was from about ages 6 to 18. And we saw that same thing happening with the girls in the database, a little bit taller, and the boys not so tall until you get to about that 12, 13 age range. And then the boys take off.
Great, thanks. That's awesome.
Right, so weight, and weight is something that is in the media all the time, childhood obesity, et cetera, but we're going to talk about what the average is, because when we talk about overweight and obese, we begin to get into the Husky or plus range of children's clothing, which will also be accommodated by some of the new standards. But right now, regarding weight, not unknown to many parents, children gain about 4 to 6 pounds a year in middle childhood, and the weight is being redistributed on their bodies. So when you're creating standards, you need to really be knowledgeable about where that weight distribution is and where the musculature is growing. So kids start to slim down in the middle as they grow. So some of our forms represent that nice slimming down and getting rid of that sort of arched back tummy feeling. Girls, unfortunately, retain a little bit more of their body fat, whereas boys become a little bit more muscular as the ages cross over. Moving on to obesity and overweight, since we touched on that a little bit, the numbers on obesity and overweight are staggering. By 2022, the number of children that are going to have this situation is enormous, which is why we need to really seriously take a look at the data in the higher percentiles, create standards plus Husky that accommodate them, and really cater to them so that they feel good about their self-image and they have product that fits and functions well for them. So it's been a tenfold rise within the past 4 decades that we've seen in North America, and that could probably be said for some regions in Europe as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you so much. So again, just to reiterate, we looked at a ton of data, a ton of children's studies. We looked at the patterns that emerged from not only the data, but from the information that we gathered from our clients. And we said, how are we going to approach this? So what we found when we looked at our form sales, for instance, is our Alba size 12 is one of the most common standard forms that's sold for both boys and girls. You could argue that some brands use 8, 6, 10, whatever, but 12 seems to be the most common that's purchased. So we decided that that would be an excellent point to start to develop a core profile. So anybody who's worked with us in the past knows that, you know, we always start developing a core body profile that matches a age demographic criteria. And then we know also internally that we had an abundance of data for this age group from all kinds of different sources. So that's where we started. Also, 12 was important for us because it's where the biggest divergence between genders exists. And not only for all the points that we noted, height, weight, stature, a lot of changes going on there, going through puberty, etc. And we also felt that that size 12 really represents a good starting point for anybody who's in the tween market, right? Anybody who's correcting tween, producing tween product. And many brands that produce apparel in sizes 12 and up, and as I mentioned earlier, for youth, and that's specifically uniforms, team sports, unisex product, etc. This is where the body size and stature challenges really become very pronounced. And nonlinear growth, and in both in terms of size, shape, and stature, is really starting to be emphasized at this age. So this is, I guess, a reveal. This is our boy 12, newly developed, and our girl 12. And one thing that you'll notice, I don't know how clearly you can see it, but we've added the age, stroke, height in centimeters. So we have a designation here, and you'll notice that our girl is a little taller than our guy, much like the data suggested. She's at 158 cm, where our guy is at 156 cm. And again, you can see visually how the divergence in the genders is starting to occur. So just kind of a view of, from an aesthetic and a technical point of view, what they look like. And for those of you who know our product and how we present things, all of the features that you have come to expect are there on these forms. I want to then transition from that starting point in our core size 12, how we've developed a youth range from size 7 to 18. So here we have our spinning ladies. And you can see at the bottom, off to the left, our girl 7 at 127 cm. You can see how that growth progression of height we were talking about, that starts to have a bit of a spurt and then starts to even out as we get to the larger sizes, where now it's more about a little bit more maturing of the body and less about the stature. So we felt really good about the way this turned out, and I cannot overemphasize the team effort that went into this. Not only do we use our data, but we have an expert modeling team. I like to refer to them as our human parametric machines, because without them, we would not be able to develop these to the degree of definition and specificity that we have. So that's the girls' range. Now, if we look at the guys' range, again, if we just look at the height from boy 127 all the way to boy 18, 178, again, you see where Emily was speaking about, it's not a stair step. We've got some growth spurts that occur, and then they continue actually until you top off at the 16 and 18 range. Another thing you might be questioning right now, some of you out there, where's the size 20? We realized that not only was the height growth not adequate enough to reflect the youth range, but the girth growth was not as well, which is probably why many brands are obligated to use a size 20. Intuitively, size 20 for a youth range just doesn't quite make sense. So we kind of grew him into himself a little bit more aggressively, again, for that youth team sports, the uniform sector, and so on. So really kind of important. Emily, anything you'd like to add to the imagery here?
No, just that we'll go into the features. You might notice the definition on these bodies is really well done by our modeling team. And of course, that's a nice link into the 3D virtual modeling that people will be doing. And one of the features that we've added is a genes rise, which is why you'll see a little bit more definition in that region.
So then we move on to our next most common technical age grouping and merchandising age grouping is our ages 2 to 6. So again, the challenge here is all these series have to be related to each other. So here we have our toddler range, age 2, again, correlated with a height at 91 cm, going to 3, 4, 5, and ending up at toddler 6 at 121 cm. Height growth pattern a little bit more in the stair step region at this age, obviously unisex and toddler. And then to complete the set, we have to look at our 0 to 18-month infant and toddlers. Again, a very common grouping for merchandising assortments and technical ranges. And we've even included Mr. Premium here. So again, you're seeing a lot of how the body weight, body fat composition, the shape of the head, the size of the head, all these, the hands, everything has been vetted by data and gives us a nice, strong progression in that newborn to 18 month.
We were particularly reliant on some medical data here too, so we tried to make that as accurate a place as we could when we get down into the wee ones, because clearly they're not a candidate for the scanning environment.
Yeah, and the thing is, there's so much data available. You just have to go looking for it, and then, as I've said many times, you know, correlating that data to what you're trying to solve for to come up with a really good vetted body growth solution. Cool. All right, Emily, take us through some of the highlights of our new solution.
Right, so I love this animation on the right. It's sort of showing you how this happens to be the boys, how the boys 7 through 18 are growing, and you can sort of see the morphing of the posture, the height, and the stance. And that's really reflected in all the work in the nonlinear way. Don mentioned that we're not doing a 20 anymore because we feel like we have gotten the growth pattern down correctly enough that that's not necessary. All the heights are noted along with the age. And we should say that for people wondering, why do we have that height in a CM, we did that because we wanted to make this really good in a global environment. That was one of the thrusts, directives from our leadership team, that they wanted to have this be a good set of standards that would work in a global environment. And then the other thing that we've done that we hope is appreciated down the line is that we have really seriously tried very, very hard to consider garment grade when we design these bodies, so that it will not be some of those age-old questions that crop up within the grading team of what do we do now? The body is doing one thing, and what are we going to do with the grade? Secondly, when we move to the next one, we've got a great depiction of what we referred to as the Denim Rise shaping. And the Denim Rise shaping is something that we've been putting on a lot of our forms that really sculpts and gives good definition so that you can now fit denim more accurately. There is shaping in both the front and the rear, and this goes throughout the entire line. We have a data source now that has been able to provide us with some significant data on extremities. So we really feel like hands, feet, and the head, both the length and the circumference, are well vetted. And this is going to be huge for brands wishing to do unisex product or one size product within an age group. And then lastly, one of the things that many of the brands wrestle with, and literally wrestle with, is getting the fit form on and off of the hanging rack. So as you noticed, all these forms have feet, which is again a requirement for the virtual body 3D avatar environment. We have managed to get many of these forms with the ability to stand without pegs, which is great. So you can put it on the floor, have it stand up, and this is largely due, one, to the feet, and two, to the fact that we have vetted the stance evolution over time. So a lot of consideration went into that.
Great, thanks, Emily. So the other thing that we want to emphasize here, and again, for the folks who have been our clients for years know what we stand behind, we're creating tools for industry to be commercially viable. You need to be able to manufacture product consistently over time and maintain your standards. So we know that these fit forms for garment evaluation are now available in the physical, updated and evolved to reflect much more accurately what this children's and youth sizing need really is. Of course, you need your identical virtual alva form that can be used in most common 3D platforms. We know for everybody who's working in 3D right now, you have to prove concept in the physical, and these tools go hand in hand for that purpose. Garment blocks, which we're big proponents of, that map to this fit form standard series. And then, of course, as Emily was mentioning, our methodology is always about body growth and vetting body growth because the body's doing one thing, and then being able to transition that into a manufacturable garment grade that maps to that size range is critically important, and it's something that many people do try to adjust on their own, struggle with it. It's a lot of work. So we've spent a lot of time and energy in making this overall solution as commercially operable as it can be. Emily, do you want to wrap us up here, the summary?
Yes, thank you so much. So just if you had to high level summarize to someone in your organization, you could say the stature and body maturity is more accelerated than previously acknowledged, and we've tried to build that into our new standards. We've obsoleted out size 20 due to this nonlinear growth pattern that we've deployed. We have added height as a global best practice within the naming call out. And again, we did this to be completely clear at where we are. And we even started calling these standards age 12, age 10, that sort of thing. So, and speaking of the age 12, we feel like that's a really nice leaping off point in either direction, either for tween product or a good basis for the sizes below that. And then lastly, as I just mentioned, the alignment of the extremity PMs has been deeply vetted, and it's been vetted between the genders. We saw that it exists in reality, and so we've deployed that into the standards. Again, it's super useful for unisex product, and in terms of the form stance and posture, we've also aligned that for things like team sport uniform tees, where it will not be gender specific, which should be a huge SKU savings for many of the brands when they realize that they're able to do this more effectively.
Absolutely. Excellent. Thanks so much, Emily. And of course, Think about all the solutions I've mentioned here before. The core fit sizes, our virtual alva forms that map to those core sizes, blocks, grading, and of course, all of these things are important tools, but without the proper training and professional development, Motif online learning platform, for instance, and our professional development series, getting the whole technical team and cross-functional teams aligned on what these standards are all about and how you can use them successfully in your organization. So with that, that kind of concludes the content of the webinar, and I'd like to open up to Q&A. I'm sure we have a few questions.
Oh, you do. Yes, you do. Okay. Can I start off with a question that's coming up quite a bit? Can you, Don, just reiterate to me where this data is from, just to clear up that one big question?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest problem we have in industry is everybody's looking to data to be the absolute answer. I've reiterated earlier, we use a lot of data. We have our own proprietary data, scan data, over 22,000 kid scans from the ages of 5 to 18. We have, as Emily mentioned, data that we collected with our Alva Kids app, which was specific to height, weight, and age. A lot of data there. We've used data from Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins University, to name a few, the CDC, the World Health Organization. And as I mentioned earlier, there's no shortage of data out there. Where most people get hung up is they get stuck on the data because they don't really know what to do with it. And data for us is an important fundamental piece of information, but how you use it to solve a problem is even more important. I think, there are always people asking, well, how new is this data? How recent is this data? We've corroborated all the data. And the other thing that's important, especially when you're looking at kids, the kids' data actually has been fairly stagnant for the last few decades. You might find that hard to believe because we actually went back a few decades and looked at growth patterns, looked at weight patterns. The North America, U.S. Market is a fully developed market. So we don't have a lot of disease. We don't have a lot of nutritional problems. And actually, probably one of the bigger challenges that's happening right now is the increased diversity of the population. And diversity leads to challenges for height, weight, and stature. So if anything, the population is becoming more diverse. So we need to have standards that offer better and more accurate options for the moms and the people who are choosing the right size for their kids.
That's great. Thanks for that, Don. I think you've slightly covered this anyway, but I'm going to ask it nonetheless. How current is the proprietary data, and how different are the new form series from the current ones, from the current forms?
Okay, so the current forms that exist, there are significant differences, and notably it's in height and girth. And we're not going to get into all of those details during this webinar. You'll be able to contact your sales representatives. We'll show you who they are at the end to get into more detail. Any brand who's considering changing a standard, this is not a small thing, and we realize that. So, there's going to be a lot of vetting and looking at this information. Hopefully it maps with some of the challenges people are having. And we know that change is costly. You've got inventory, you've got marketing materials that need to be updated, and mindsets within the organizations that have to shift. But the reality that we've seen is the current standards aren't mapping to the challenges. So hopefully as people go into the details of why these standards are different, they can make those kind of discoveries and decisions on their own.
Great, thanks for that, Don. Okay, there's a lot of talk about height in your presentation, and we have a question about this. Do you really believe that this is working on a global standard by just using centimeters?
Well, first of all, we don't just use centimeters. Centimeters are a call out for an international nod. Of course, the centimeters can be converted to inches, and inches can be labeled on the form. I think your marketing material and how you present sizing to your individual consumer base would be very interesting, because you can simply call out age, height in centimeters or inches. I mean, I would imagine most people would call out inches, but it's such a, how should I say, it's not an intuitive concept to call out inches unless you're at the doctor, or you got a little chart on the wall that your kid walks up to and points to and holds his hand up to see how tall he is. But from an international point of view, centimeters are obviously much more universal.
Excellent. That's great. Thanks for covering that one. Okay.
Sure.
Can the 3D avatars be purchased without having the physical form?
That's a very specific sales question. I don't know why it wouldn't be, but you'd have to check with your local salesperson.
Okay. To be fair, any questions that we asked today, I will also pass back to Alvanon. So
yes.
you know,
I'm not in sales, so I don't want to make I want to make sure I don't misspeak.
No,
I don't see
good.
why. I don't see why not.
No.
3D platforms are what people use today. So yes, of course, I would imagine you'd be able to have your avatar without having the fit form, and which will be all available on our Alva Body platform, which will be launching in I believe January of 2019.
Yeah, sure. Great. Okay. Can you now talk a little bit about Husky or plus studies and new forms?
I feel like I'm doing all the talking. Emily, you want me to continue?
Doing well, my man. Very well.
All right, so this is the thing. You've got to start with your core standard to begin with, right? Because in order to create a Husky standard, it has to differentiate itself significantly, not unlike plus size product, right? So we will be developing Husky. Probably it will be available in a physical form in one core size, probably the 12, and we will develop the entire avatar set. We have not begun that work. It's R&D on our part. We wanted to get the core size, which is what most people are going to use. But rest assured, sometime in Q1 2019, we will have a size set avatar for not only Husky, and I don't know what we're going to call it. We may find that Husky is an outdated term. I don't know. And then also a thin version, or however people refer to that appropriately, but a skinnier version of the standard series, and then a Husky version of the standard series.
That's great. I have to say, from the UK perspective, or my perspective, you're talking about a form of a dog. I'm sorry, Husky is a dog. I hadn't heard of that before. So
yes,
my
here in Washington State, that's the mascot. So I hear you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it takes me back to Sears in the 60s, you know, when you see that sign Husky, and I scratched my head. I didn't even know what it meant. So anyway, we might have to come up with a better nomenclature for that.
Okay, right. Emily, another question for you. What is the Denim Rise that you mentioned?
The Denim Rise is something that I feel like we've been slowly putting this into the market, and I believe we're going to be releasing a adult size form that has the Denim Rise quite shortly as well. What the Denim Rise is it represents more realistic sculpting in the seat and more realistic sculpting in the front, so that you really can get a fit. As we all know, denim is frequently worn a lot closer to the body than your traditional set of trousers or something like that. So it's not just for denim, though. It will work particularly well for leggings, athleisure, kids in yoga pants, and tighter fitting clothing, even perhaps swim. So it's just a more sculpted, more profiled, realistic looking front and back rise to the form.
Great, thanks for that. I'm just looking at another question here that goes back to this Husky and plus size thing. It says, what's the major difference between the regular, the slim, and the Husky or plus sizes? And why do so few brands cater to slim and Husky or plus size for kids?
Okay, that's a great question. And as we've noted earlier, you can't ignore the obesity epidemic. And I think, unfortunately, it boils down to SKU count and what a brand is able to offer their customers. Everybody's going to have to get used to the fact that you're going to have bigger kids to deal with. And it's not going to be about a stature. It's going to be about increased girth at that stature. So as I said earlier, you know, we've got our work cut out for it, but we're up for the challenge. At what point does someone be considered obese at that stature point, and where do we put that weight mass on the body? It's going to be a wonderful challenge that we're looking forward to, but we'd love nothing more than to be able to provide to our clients, who are the brands and retailers, a tool that will enable them to cater to what I would call a significant market opportunity.
And Don, this might be one too where the virtual avatar will play out very well for a brand. So they might decide to develop in the regular, and then if they're going to go Husky or Plus or Slim, that might be the one that they extrapolate into the 3D as they get more into that software.
That's an excellent point. We find that our customers are coming to us more and more to develop size sets of their core size and avatars, body growth charts and avatars, because people are working in 3D for a lot more reasons than just creating the base product. They're checking graded size sets for logos, graded size sets for proportion. It's very much used in many different ways, and it's geared more toward the mass production. So like Emily pointed out, excellent use is to be able to create that secondary plus anything but Husky name that differentiates itself significantly from the regular range, so that you have a reason to offer it to the client.
That's lovely. Thank you. That's definitely going to be a challenge, I can see. Okay, moving on. How different are the North American kids' fit forms from the EU or Asia ones?
Spoiler alert, we're not going to stop with North American kids. I think it's incumbent on us to go around the world and look at all the standards. But I guess, Emily, do you have any quick answers on that, or you want me to continue to ramble?
One really exciting development is our Asia scan team has been out collecting scans all over China, what we're extremely excited about. So we are going to have some amazing data out of Asia to be able to form up the Asian bodies a little bit more correctly. When we were looking at the current children's standards against the EU standards that are presently in place, we found that the EU standards were not bad and maybe a little bit closer to reality than the existing US and North American standards, but we're going to do due diligence in terms of the same data search, the same excavation of scan data, health data, records data on EU, and say yes or no. The European market children have changed significantly enough to merit a shift in all that entails, as opposed to the North American. So stay tuned for both Asia and Europe.
But historically speaking, standards were driven by convention. So if a height convention in Asia, for instance, was a straight 10 cm, like a stair step, like we were talking about earlier, that would be an artificial construct that's a naming convention for Asia. In Europe, it might also be, and I haven't really looked at it lately, but more of a conventional growth that would be an expectation in the consumer market. That would be the quick answer I could think of.
It might be more challenging to change the mindset than it is to change the standard.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you both for that. Okay, here's another one. With the new data, is there a change in grade rules or dress forms?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Because as we mentioned earlier, there's nothing about these growth patterns that are linear. So what might be viewed conventionally as very unconventional, what we're doing is probably unconventional. Your growth in girth is not going to follow for instance, inch and a half, 2 inch. It's not going to look like that. In much the same way as the height jumps don't look like that. So yes, it's incumbent on us to, again, follow up with the body growth charts, the garment grade rules, and absolutely the answer is yes.
Brilliant, thank you. Now this next question is clearly from an existing Alvanon customer who has an exceptional attention to detail. So here's the question. The stance at the leg seems to have changed to be wider from previous Alvanon forms. and the thigh seems to be more muscular. Is this the case?
Emily?
Yes, good spotting, whoever called that out. Yes, absolutely. We realized that for the boys in particular, we've made that stance a little bit more natural. One of the criticisms that we had was that pants did not fit, trousers did not fit as well as they might have because of the stance. So we made it a little bit more naturalistic. Of course, the natural fit is also aided by the Denim Rise. So yeah, absolutely, we did make a change for the girls. The legs are a little bit more straight down and more natural. So you'll notice that when you take a look at the forms as well.
Yeah, good eye. Please note that when we do things like this, all of our knowledge and experience is cumulative. As Dr. Wang used to say, all we can do is evolve. So we've tried to incorporate other types of feedback we've gotten over the years to make this newest standard as up to date as it can be.
Yeah, and that's the stance difference that we've deployed really helps these. A, it's more naturalistic, and B, it helps them stand without the pegs.
Yep. I think we have time, maybe, for one more question or two.
Okay, yeah, we'll give it a go. So here we go. I've got juniors versus girls clothing. What's the difference?
Ooh, that's a good one. The juniors, of course, is its own size range. So that's the traditional, 3, 5, 7, 9 sizing. So and what's really interesting when we think about these stands or forms, you can call them whatever you'd like. You can call them whatever you want, but the juniors is probably a little bit older group of people that are looking for a different type of product. There's more mature styling that's actually embedded in some of the juniors product, and probably there's a different level of maturation in terms of body tone and shaping. So they do differ in that way. Don, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, you hit the nail right on the head. And let's say you're a junior, you offer junior product to your customer. Let's say you chose the size 16, for instance, and thought that was very representative. As Emily rightly stated, you can change the number on the front if it matches what your demographic is. Call it her 3 or 5 or whatever she maps to, and then you can have your own size range from there. So that's kind of why we wanted to develop these, because junior is a very tricky and specific market. Some people do it extremely well. Many of them have proprietary solutions, but we wanted to offer something that was a little bit more off the rack, if you will.
That's brilliant. Thanks both. I know a couple of people have asked me, and you may not have the answer to this. A couple of people have asked me, although I know that there's going to be a replay of this event, it's being recorded, we're going to put it live in the next couple of days. Are you going to be offering the slide deck for people to download, or is that something you're clinging on to, because that is your data, obviously?
Yeah, generally we don't offer the slide deck. You're welcome to view this webinar for as long as it exists, and I think that it shuts off eventually.
Yeah, no problem. Oh, we've got a fire engine coming past.
Well, welcome to New York City. We've got something, I guess, a really good cue for me to start signing off here.
Absolutely.
So listen, for everybody, again, thank you so much for joining us. We here at Alvanon are really excited to be able to present this information to you. If you've got any additional questions, please contact your salespeople. Most of you recognize the faces you're seeing, and if you don't, take note. Not only in our North American markets, but of course in Europe and Asia. We want you to make sure that you can get the answers you need. And as far as on behalf of Emily and myself, we want to thank you so much for joining us. It was our pleasure to brief you on our findings today, and we hope you have a terrific day.
Excellent. Thanks, Don. Thanks, Emily. You've both been brilliant, and thanks for all the questions. Look forward to another Alvanon webinar in the next 12 months or so. And yeah, it's great to hear from you again. And everyone have a great rest of your day, and thanks for joining. Goodbye now.